Thanks for listening to Fluff and Crunch, where we talk about the connection and sometimes disconnect between system, setting, and story in tabletop RPGs.
How are you doing today, John?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm well also. We're glad both of us here are at the end of our work week and set aside some time to record, to talk with John Houlihan today, who is the guy behind all things Achtung! Cthulhu at Modiphius Entertainment. So we thank him for that, and also an author of a series of books, that one of which we're gonna talk about today. So John, as always, thank you so much for being willing to come on. I appreciate it. I love that kind of the insider view, and also just your thoughts on all the mythos and things like that. It's interesting.
It's always a pleasure to have a chat. Absolutely.
Thank you. So just really quickly, for those who maybe haven't listened to the other episodes, and I'll put links to the other Achtung! Cthulhu episodes in the notes for this. Why don't you give us a little bit of background on your title, the work you're doing in this area in gaming, and then we can move toward your books.
Sure. So I'm John Houlihan. I'm the line editor for Achtung! Cthulhu at Modiphius Entertainment. And for those of you who've not encountered Achtung! Cthulhu, it's World War II crossed with H.P. Lovecraft, kind of a bit weird war. World War II with tentacles, as we always say, is the short version. It's been a tabletop role-playing game for nearly 10 years now. Was about, in fact, 3 years ago this month, was relaunched as part of Modiphius's 2D20 system, in-house system. And I kind of took over as the Dark Overlord of Achtung! Cthulhu at that time, and we've been enjoying ourselves with some cosmic horror and World War II fun ever since.
So let me that's a good point. I often forget, because I never played Achtung! Cthulhu under the Call of Cthulhu rules. So yeah. Achtung! Cthulhu has, as a property, has long predated the existence of the current proper 2D20 game. Were you involved with any of it before 2D20, or did you come on board to helm that operation?
Yeah, I did. I was actually I was there at the beginning, as it were, way back. Actually, Achtung! Cthulhu was the product which launched Modiphius Entertainment as a company. It was the first Kickstarter Chris Birch did, who's Modiphius's boss, and it's his baby. He masterminded that first thing, and I wrote some adventures for it. I wrote some, including the Trollberg Monstrosities. I wrote some fiction for it as well, and I was sort of always had a foot in the Achtung! Cthulhu camp. And then when it came, it was also Savage Worlds as well. I should also say, a very kind of popular incarnation of the game too. And as when it eventually was time for a bit of a relaunch, I got involved with the full thing.
So what is it? Because obviously here we have a decade of working with mythos related, and I've always loved I actually, and maybe this is heretical, but I actually prefer, for play purposes, the pulpier spin on mythos that Achtung! Cthulhu presents. I actually don't. I personally find, like, Call of Cthulhu is something I will read. I will read Lovecraft and Lovecraftian literature, but I'm less interested in playing that. I find it's too distinctive a flavor that once you get it, you're like, I can't get it out of my mouth. That's all there is. Whereas the pulpy side of things provides some more flexibility. Now, you, in addition to, working on this, like you said, for a decade and writing the fiction, and I think that's really, maybe that's why, because I think you're doing a terrific job with this. In terms of like shepherding a line, I'm really happy with everything that's been done as a player and a GM. And maybe a piece of that is because obviously you have this abiding interest in the mythos, you must, but then also you're not just looking at this, it sounds to me, from a game or system standpoint, you're like waist deep in just the fiction of it. So what is it about the mythos and tentacled things and gibbering masses of goo in the dark. What is it about that's so interesting to you, if you can put a finger on it?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. I think it really has endured for a few different reasons. I mean, I think Lovecraft's conception and ideas of all these things were, very revolutionary and quite and really different from anything that went before. But I think the reason it's prospered since is because it's become this real collaborative universe. Lovecraft himself was very happy for Robert E. Howard to borrow aspects of it for his Conan stories. And ever since, and I guess partly because it's entered the public domain as well, so people can write in it with confidence, and there's no copyright issues or anything like that. And I think it's become this shared collaborative universe for writers from Robert E. Howard to Brian Lumley, even many of the sort of acclaimed modern horror or fantasy writers borrow aspects of it. And I think that's probably the kind of core appeal of it, is that it's one of those great shared universes that you can take and kind of carve your own niche in it. I mean, I like you, I like the more pulpy aspects of it. I'm not really attracted to the idea that you can, you will see one of these things, tentacled horrors, and that'll be it. That'll be your sanity gone, and you'll be spend the rest of your life in an asylum. I'm more of the Robert E. Howard, I guess. You see one of these tentacle horrors, and you swing a sword at it or punch it in the face,
Yeah.
and that kind of. I like the idea that humanity can fight back against or has at least has a fighting chance against the kind of horrors of the mythos. But I think that's it, really. I think it's because it's been built so much throughout, and is actually quite pervasive in a lot of fantasy and horror and even sci-fi literature. I think it's a lovely background that you can bring your own foreground to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good point actually, because I think that the call it the qualifiers of the mythos are, they're almost more of like a conceptual overlay to a story than they are like, okay, you got to have vampires or you're going to have ghosts or something. There are certain things like the thing, man screwing around with things he's not meant to, things, horrors that are thoroughly alien and not understandable. Um, yeah, I think that makes it really it flexible. It's one of these things where people can put their own spin on it without it being, oh, I'm just going to serve up the same thing
Yeah,
over. I'm going to put my spin on it, but it's basically the same
yeah.
thing. Um,
I,
yeah,
I think the other aspect of it, which appeals to me particularly as a writer, is that there's this tradition that dark lore and strange knowledge is handed down in these mythos tomes like the Necronomicon or the Cult of Ghoul or any of those things, and that kind of is a bit like being a writer anyway, right? You're the pantheon of sci-fi and fantasy and horror writers that have preceded you. I grew up just a real book addict. I'd always have my head in a sci-fi book or a fantasy book or whatever. And I think it appeals to me on that level as well, that this dark knowledge has been transmitted down and is now mine to do what I want with, right?
so talking about doing what you want with it, you have written obviously a decent amount, a healthy amount of fiction, and you have a new book coming out. That's what
Okay.
I would like to talk about that. I'd like to point people
Cool.
in that direction. I'd like to point people to the world, the spin, the slice of the mythos that you've created, which I think is unique and it's interesting. And it's also there, I think there's kind of a fun side to it, which I
Hmm.
like. Maybe that's a little odd, fun with the mythos. But I want to talk about that. What is this world? What is this era, this slice? And then let's talk about this book of yours that you've got coming out in the near term.
Sure. So, my particular, although I love writing about World War II, that's one of my favourite time periods. One of my other favourite time periods is Napoleonic times, and I love this kind of epic, grand nature of the Napoleonic age. This guy who rose from the Corsican corporal to being the most successful military leader and probably the most hated man in all of Europe, Napoleon Bonaparte. And my particular spin on that is a world I've chosen to call Mon Dieu Cthulhu. So in French, that means my God Cthulhu. It works on a couple of ways. It could mean, my God, Cthulhu, he's coming towards me. Or it could mean, perhaps more sinisterly, Cthulhu is my God.
Right, right, and like as you say that as you genuflect
Yeah,
and hope
exactly.
he doesn't, do something horrible to you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So this is again, it's a slightly pulpish take on the mythos, and it was really it was an interesting exercise trying to writing the press releases and publicity, all the kind of stuff you have to do when you're doing a thing, and trying to describe this thing. And I keep coming back to the phrase swashbuckling supernatural adventure during the age of Napoleon, and I think that probably is the best summary of it. It has elements of historical fantasy. It has elements of cosmic horror. It has elements of action and adventure, pulp. Um, there's even a touch of romance, which is a sort of new field for me, but I'm kind of quite enjoying it. And all underpinned by this dark humour, I think that it actually works really well with the mythos. The third book in the Mon Dieu Cthulhu series is called Shadow of the Serpent, and the protagonist is Lieutenant Colonel Gaston Dubois, a dashing French hussar who served through the Napoleonic age. And the kind of conceit of the story, and a little tip of my hat to Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote the amazing Brigadier Gerard series, is that Dubois is a retired lieutenant colonel now, having served many years in the field, and he's telling his memoirs to an unnamed journalist, and
That's
he's
cool.
sort of a little bit like Holmes and Watson, and he's sort of recounting all his adventures. So the first book was called The Crystal Void, and that was a sort of quite short novella where he sort of first discovers the truth about the mythos and what's going on and what underpins the Napoleonic age. The second book was called Feast of the Dead, and that was his first sort of independent command as a leader of hussars. And once again, he encounters the forces of the mythos and is a bit more experienced this time, but not much, and acquires a new sidekick, Sergeant Sacklow. And this third book, Shadow of the Serpent, this is really where he is set on a path to discover what I've called the eternal struggle, which is the defining meta story of this Napoleonic age. Dark forces are, shall we say, I don't want to give away too much, but they're fueling the Napoleonic wars for their own ends. Dubois first set on the trail of this in Shadow of the Serpent, and as the series grows, he will grow into discovering more, becoming a champion for mankind, and hopefully, well, we'll see, foiling the nefarious forces of darkness who are plotting humanity's downfall.
Okay, so this is cool. You actually answered a few of my questions. Some of the things I was thinking about. So this is the third in a series, but you foresee more. So this isn't your classic fantasy or sci-fi trilogy, and this is the pin in the map kind of thing. This is
Yeah.
you okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's
Yeah,
cool.
so the first book was like the kind of his introduction to the world of the mythos. The second book was a bit of development of that, and then this third book is really setting on if you want to call it the classic hero's journey. This is what will set him off on the big defining battle of his age and sweep you across, hopefully, all the key parts of the Napoleonic Wars, particularly the Peninsular War in Spain, which was one of the most interesting parts of it, I'd say.
So this starts in terms of history, obviously, which you're clearly playing fast and loose with because you have no choice. When does the primary story in this new book, like year wise, about when does this begin? Just so I
Yeah.
can set it.
So yeah, sure. So this is 1810.
Okay.
The Sir Arthur Wellesley, later Duke of Wellington, has been chased back to Portugal, and is lying behind the fortifications of Torres Vedras. And the French forces under Massena are kind of camped outside, laying siege to him. It's the winter of 1810 stroke the beginning of 1811 when this happens.
So I like the way that you described it, like the not the elevator pitch, but like the one sentence. This is swashbuckling adventure. Say it again.
Swashbuckling supernatural adventure
In the age of Napoleon.
in the age of Napoleon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now I know that this is not. There is no game property attached to this.
Well, not currently, but
Not currently. Okay.
as a game designer, I can't, and as an author, and I've always seen a great crossover between the two
Mm.
things. But there is a TTRPG and possibly even a kind of skirmish game in my mind for development next year, I think. Now I've got the kind of meta story of conflict all sorted out. I think there's definitely an opportunity to do a role playing game based on it too. A kind of probably kind of quite a rules light, but something that captures that sort of swashbuckling, pulpy spirit of that age.
Yeah, um, I could see some form of 2D20 fitting this well. Like if someone, when I was looking through the promotional materials that you sent, and just, I know that you've mentioned this in past times when we've talked. That's where my mind always goes. When I read fiction that's interesting to me, that I'm like, oh, this is a story that this is my dopey way of describing it, is this story has legs. Like this story, once you get your head around it a little bit, this story will get up and go places on its own. Like you don't have to keep pouring into it. Like how do I get something out of this at the table? This story has legs. That is, it will, it'll get you thinking. And and so whenever I read good fiction, I'm always thinking like, oh, what game would this be good for? What kind of mechanic would do this or whatever? And so I got to thinking about like, yeah, I mean, personally, I think it would be really easy to just take Octung Cthulhu and scribble off the serial numbers and dumb down the rate of fire of some of the weapons and remove
Yeah,
some weapons tables, and you could just go straight from there with it.
yeah. I mean, you kind of, I definitely agree. Like a 2D20, 2D20 version is probably favourite. I think I might do a kind of a generic. Well, I'm still deciding exactly, and I mean discussions with Modiphius as well about,
Sure.
about doing various bits on it. I think I'll probably do definitely a 2D20 version and maybe a more generic system version as well. Maybe something a bit more generalist. But yeah, you've always got to have these things in mind, don't you? I've kind of um, I think also like you have to have a USP, don't you, for your unique selling point for your RPGs. And I really want to have a great sort of sword fighting system somewhere in there. But also I think like a kind of um, somewhere a social combat system
Mhm.
where your wit and repartee or just your filthy insults can inflict inflict damage on opponents as well, or maybe you duel with words as well as swords in the social side of
You know,
because there's grand balls and all that kind of thing as well where you might meet your opponents and duel without swords. So yeah, they're kind of the two things bubbling up in my brain at the moment.
that's a tough that's tough because it is, in my experience, it's often in the social interactions, the one-to-one social interactions, either debates or negotiations or you know witty repartee to cut someone apart with the words instead of swords at a ball or something like that, which to
Yeah,
me is darn near an essential ingredient for that era. I don't know
yeah,
what it is. Maybe because we're English speaking peoples. Like when I think French, I immediately think like powdered wigs, dudes in heels, and people like sniping at each other at like high society functions. That's just
yeah,
what comes to mind.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's a tough place for tabletop RPGs rules wise to function. So yeah,
Mhm.
a workable social, it'd be social combat system essentially would be
Yeah.
outstanding.
I've got to say, I have no idea how I'm going to do it yet, but that's the,
It
that's
sounds like a
the
good idea.
that's the aim. So yeah, I think, but I think that for me, the two things have always worked hand in hand. Good fiction is world building, and then a game is a chance for other people to play in that world and kind of extend it way beyond anything you could do on your own, and it's just fun, right?
To me, also good fiction is is such a great like mine for ideas. And as long as, if your players haven't read the books, you look like a genius. As you pillage and get inspired by an author. Back to the story, this Shadow of the Serpent.
Yeah.
Obviously, we don't want to give away too much. Um, but we know that we have this hero. There's a little bit of romance, which is cool. That's realistic. You breathe life into a character instead of it just being this like two-dimensional, this is the hero
Yeah.
adventurer cutout. Um, and he's discovering things that are going on beneath the surface. Or what else can you tell us about the character or the story that he gets sucked into? Because that seems to, and maybe that's not the right description, but that seems to often be the case with like mythos things, like the
Yeah.
person finds out the thing and they are compelled or they're drawn into.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
tell us about that.
yeah, so the character is a guy called Lieutenant Gaston Dubois. He's like a typical, well, not typical, but he grew up in the Ardennes, quite a sort of skilled hunter and etc. But very skilled horseman and fighter. Uh, Dashing but dim, occasionally dim. He is, a typical hussar, very hot-blooded. His passion can get the better of him. They reading the sort of literature and stuff. They sometimes held they considered it a disgrace, some of the hussars, if they lived to the age of 30, because they clearly weren't pushing the envelope hard enough. So he starts out as this very sort of hot-blooded and rash character, but courageous, cares deeply about his men, a little bit motivated by glory and honor, and so quite naive, I think, young and naive in the ways of the world. As a narrator, he's a lot more mature and a lot more sophisticated, but he tells the story as he was when he was a young man. So immensely proud to be a Hussar. He thinks this is the pinnacle of existence, to be one of these hot-blooded, uh, adventurous fighters who, they go deep behind enemy lines, and they were sort of the scouts and the eyes of Napoleon's armies, so they'd report back. They're also called thieves on horseback because they used to go and steal food and wine and all, and the local girls' hearts as well, apparently. So they were quite these dashing, romantic figures. Anyway, Shadow of the Serpent, his crime, Dubai ends up fighting a duel with this guy over a lady. He succeeds, he wins, although at some cost. But his opponent is revealed to be something slightly more than human. After this episode, he is summoned to his colonel and banished from the Hussars for the disgraceful crime of dueling, which actually was banned, I think, by the emperor, because he didn't want his officers killing each other over things, and especially the Hussars, who were who are these hot-blooded fellows. Mm-hmm. So he's sent in disgrace to a regiment or a squadron of dragoons, which he has always looked down on as neither one thing or the other, not cavalry, not infantry, but a strange mix of the two.
Hodgepodge of a trooper. Yeah,
his beautiful hussar's uniform is replaced by this bottle green monstrosity that he absolutely hates. Anyway, the company, they're called the Accursed 31st because they're a notoriously unlucky squadron, and so he is sent to this isolated farm where they're stationed, and he's got to try and whip these guys into shape, give them some training, restore their horses and the gear is in bad condition. So he's got challenges on that score. one of his fellow officers turns out to be a really odious rival, not a very nice man at all. The whole countryside is raised against him. The Spanish are not very keen on the occupying French forces. And to top it all, there's a local guerrilla bandita leader called La Spina, or the Thorn, who's very keen on taking his head. So he has to slowly transform this squadron rather, fight several battles, and then face off against the Spanish army, the actual Spanish army in an engagement towards the end, where he has a chance to restore his lost reputation and honor. But I can't really give away too much.
I don't want to know.
I hope that's a good outline.
This is interesting because this it sounds to me like you've written a story that, it's obviously it's historical fiction. You have it set in a known moment in history that most people aren't going to know a lot about the detail, but they're vaguely familiar with the broad brushstrokes of it. And I'd like to think that, I think that most people who are habitual gamers tend to be better read, and they have their eras that they're interested in and things like that. But it sounds to me like you've woven a story that is both set in the history and uses the history and, creates, you have mundane challenges, you have realistic, historical type challenges, and then you have this mythos stuff that's woven into it. So this sounds to me like you're describing a story that is historical fiction, but also historical fiction with the supernatural stuff attached to it. It is not purely one or purely the other.
Yeah, I mean that was what, as I say, when I was trying to find my categories on Amazon for this book, it was a kind of like, now where does this fit exactly? Yeah, I think that. Yeah, it's a blend of genres for sure. And I think like there's a maxim that writers are thieves as well as hussars, and we like to pluck bits from all these different parts that we can hopefully make work together. And I think certainly Mon Dieu Cthulhu is one of those things, and hopefully it's greater than the sum of its parts. I do hope so.
Well, I like that. I like that though. That like personally with Achtung Cthulhu, one of the things that I like about it, because World War II is like I have a couple of eras. Like most people who are into history, you have a couple of eras or threads or themes that are most interesting. World War II is interesting to me for a number of reasons, and I like that in reading or playing or prepping Achtung Cthulhu, I can rely on what actually happened, the real backdrop, and I can play within that backdrop, just play straight within that backdrop. And I actually, for me, that you can use that to make the supernatural stuff that much more disturbing or brilliant or lurid or whatever, because you're not just like, okay, we're just doing supernatural stuff all the time. It's like a zombie movie. Okay, there's zombies everywhere. That's what we have. Just zombies everywhere. But you have the mundane irritants of daily life, or the challenges, like this guy has got to get his unit together and he's in this crappy situation that he doesn't want to find himself in, but his it sounds to me like his own personal code of honor is like, I'm not just going to like give up and walk away. I have a duty. And then these other things further complicate things that are a hassle enough or challenging enough as they are. And I like that actually, because that putting it against that backdrop, putting the weird stuff against a plausible, coherent, real backdrop, I actually think enables you to spotlight what makes the tentacles that much more horrible.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think you have to, if you are constantly chased or encountering these things all the time, I think you almost have to have peaks and troughs, don't you? Of I'm sure they do say a soldier's life is 95% the real mundane,
more than that,
everyday stuff, right? And
it's a lot of time in the motor pool.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is probably true of people who've served throughout the ages, right? There is a lot of time when you are just doing the everyday things, patrolling, feeding yourself, looking after your vehicles, in this case horses, oiling your weapons, making sure they're in order,
dealing with people who are a hassle.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, the people of the characters you encounter are always an interesting thing as well. I mean, when Dubois banished to this place, he has got one ally, which is his dependable sergeant, Bastien Saclo, who's an ex-Imperial Guardsman who, when they first met in the last book, Feast of the Dead, they really didn't get on at first, but then gradually, as they served together and they got to know each other a little bit better, they kind of, they sort of bonded, and now although there's a difference in ranks and age, you would say they're kind of quite firm friends, albeit in a very very formal manner at the moment, shall we say?
Yeah. So this is, again, it's the third. Is this the longest of the three?
Yeah, I think. Well, I think the first one is quite. Crystal Void is quite a short novella. You probably read that in 2-3 hours, maybe. Feast of the Dead and Shadow of the Serpent are both around about 65,000-70,000 words.
Okay.
You're talking, proper novel length for both of those.
Okay. When does it come out?
It's actually, I'm launching it at the Innsmouth Literary Festival, a new festival in the UK for lovers of cosmic horror. Let's think. That's the 28th of September.
Okay.
And then Shadow of the Serpent's formally released on October the 3rd, although the pre-order is available now. You can fill your boots and go pre-order it straight away, or you can visit my website, john-houlihan.net, where there's a chance to win some signed copies and a few articles and blogs on the world and what Mon Dieu Cthulhu is and some of the characters and all that kind of thing. So come along, sign up for my newsletter, and you'll get all you need about the world of Mon Dieu Cthulhu. And of course, as I develop the role-playing game and maybe the tabletop game as well, there'll be a chance for people to participate, do some testing, all that kind of thing.
So I'm going to put all the links to all of that, including the Innsmouth. I love that. That event, because this is gonna go ahead and this will drop on the 25th. So if you're listening to this the day that this drops, it's 25 September, and so this will drop before that. So I want to make sure that I have all the links, whether you're watching this on YouTube or you're listening to it in the pod. All the links are down in the notes for the version that you're listening to. So people can, I'm sure they can subscribe to something to get information about this from you.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. There's plenty of links on the site, and you'll get a little pop up if you want to sign up. But yeah, the Innsmouth Literary Festival, I'll be there in person, doing a reading and signing books and all that kind of thing. So come along and say hello.
Excellent. Yeah, and yeah, like I said, I'll put all the links there. Go take a look at this. I've read some of John's. Some of your writing. From that anthology of the Achtung Cthulhu stories that came out.
Oh yeah, Dark Tales. Yeah.
Yes, I have the paperback copy in my games closet. So I think that this is an era that, again, everyone has heard of it. I think visually, and I think this is really important, especially for historic eras. There's like a visual backdrop. There's a way it looks. Now, whether that's purely or completely accurate or not is another issue. But the way people, the Napoleonic era kind of looks like this, kind of feels or sounds like that. I think it's a really neat place to put a set of stories that you can then put your own spin on. So if you're listening or watching, I suggest you go take a look at that, and then take a look also at John's work on Achtung Cthulhu, because it's a really good game. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it, John.
Oh, a real pleasure. A real pleasure to chat to you as always, Jeremy. Excellent.
Thank you, as always, for listening to Fluff and Crunch. You can join our Discord, you can subscribe to the podcast, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, all through the links in the show notes. Thanks again. Have a great day. We look forward to talking with you.